Thank you for staying with us. As the year gradually winds down, President Bola Tinubu is already kick-starting the financial agenda for the year ahead. The president has proposed a spending plan for year 2024, which is the budget. According to the Minister of Budget and Planning, Atiku Bagudu, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has proposed 26.01 trillion naira as the 2024 budget. The minister disclosed this earlier in the week. The proposed budget is expected to be submitted to the National Assembly before December the 31st, 2023 to enable quick execution. Now, the budget pegs crude oil price at $73.96 a barrel. Joining us to discuss this via Zoom from Abuja is public finance and policy analyst Olusegun Elemo. Segun, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to join.
Right. Now, there's been divergent reaction to this budget, especially the figures and some of the items mentioned in the budget. But I wonder what you're getting, what reflections you are getting from this budget. There are those who says that this budget still reflects that we are heavily dependent on oil. There are those who are not seeing some semblance of hope in it. What are you getting? What are your impressions from what the figures given for the 2024 budget?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, it's important to first of all mention that the executive now proactively thinking about the 2024 budget at this time is commendable. And it goes in line with the philosophy of the previous president, who had said that, who had brought back the financial year from January to December. So the president looking to, finalize, the budget preparation and assent to the budget before the 31st of December is something that we're looking forward to, and we hope that they're able to meet up with the deadline that they set for themselves. But then looking at the parameters, with which the budget is based on, I think there are things that are a bit inconsistent because of the current reality. The current fiscal reality that we're in. Take for instance, the budget minister is looking at $73 per barrel crude oil price. Yes, that's a reasonable figure looking at current realities of, the crude oil is currently trading as of today at $91 per barrel. But then when you look at the production that is being hoped for at 1.7 million barrels per day, it's something that is a bit pushy. Because even as of September 2023, we're still doing 1.3 million barrels per day. Even though the president has instructed the military to curb crude oil theft, there's still those lingering issues around the theft of crude oil, and whether it is artisanal miners or the big players that are actually, stealing the crude. So there's still that issue that has been, that hasn't been resolved, and we're still battling with it. We are still not able to scale up production in terms of crude oil. And the president will need to look at, the oil producing areas and see how this can be dealt with really. But then in dealing with it, you need to make examples of people and ensure that, that serves as deterrent, really, because we're seeing large vessels on the shores, taking crude. These are not artisanal miners. These are not, artisanal refiners or, petty crude oil, thieves. These are big players. So the president will need to look in that direction. Mm-hmm. Again, when you then focus on the foreign exchange rates that the government is looking at, something around 700 thereabout. Yes, even as of today, I think I got the news yesterday that the naira is now trading at more than 800, naira to the dollar, the I and E window. So that could be a little bit, and recall that the president had instructed that the FX market should be harmonized. So that's a bit reasonable. But then looking at the inflation figures, projecting inflation at 21% is truly, truly unrealistic. Inflation as of September 2023 is at 26.7%. It doesn't look like inflation is going to come down anytime soon, even though the CBN is making some inroads in that area. For instance, looking to, it has, for instance, lifted the ban on the 43 items that were previously restricted from accessing Forex from the official window. So that is expected to then ease up price of commodity in the market. But it's not going to be instant. It's not going to be immediate. It's going to take time to ease out. So I expect that even though the inflation figures will ease up in the medium term and in the long term, but in the immediate, which is of course about 3 months into 2024, I don't see it coming as low as 21%.
Well,
but we hope to see the numbers from the players.
Right. The 2024 budget will be almost a fifth bigger than last year's, looking at the figure. But between looking at revenue projection by this current administration, if you check the between 2015 and 2021, its revenue projection, Nigeria didn't achieve 70% of its revenue projection, which led to a spike in borrowing from the central bank, through the ways and means. But with the prevailing circumstances, how imperative is it for the federal government to accurately and consistently project what it has the capacity to earn and as revenue and spend in order to implement its planned programs of activities?
Well, you see, truly, when you don't earn revenue as projected, then it then brings to question the credibility of your fiscal plans. And it impacts on the living conditions of the people because, your fiscal plans are targeted at, improving the welfare of the people, whether in providing infrastructure, in intervening in education, in providing healthcare services and what have you. Those are the instruments by which you help, the people, whether they are in the middle class, the upper class, or the poorest of the poor. But then that is also dependent on revenue, like you mentioned. And over the last couple of years, we haven't done more than 70%. And that impacted on the debt service to revenue ratio, which of course was hovering around 90, 91, 93%, in the last administration. And it got so bad, that the economy almost collapsed. Until the president then came up and then said, no, we can continue with the fuel subsidy. We had to do something about it. And that has now opened up, windows of revenue inflows to the government. I understand that the government is now looking at, tax and fiscal policy reforms. Recently, constituted a committee to look into that. I know that Mr. Taiwo Yodele is heading that committee, and I expect that he will do, some fantastic job in providing policy recommendations to government as to where to travel in that regard. But then is that, look at what we have today. If we don't do, say for instance, we benchmark against 70% revenue inflows into government as of today, for instance, and then we are looking at 8.2 trillion as debt service projection for 2024. It doesn't look well for us if we're then doing 70%, because what it is today is that even if government raises all the revenue, let's say for instance, you are looking at 26 trillion naira budget and you're able to raise all the revenue. If you are now spending 8.2 trillion as debt service, you will be spending 30% of your budget, to service debts in 2024. And if you then now unable to raise all the 26 trillion inflows, and you do 70%, it then pushes that percentage of debt service to revenue upwards, maybe to about 60%, which is still not, good for what we have. But like I said, the non-oil sector will really need to be looked at. And I know that the government is also doing something significant around the mining and mineral sector, and hoping to generate more inflows in addition to what it's doing with tax reforms and fiscal policy.
Right. Let's perhaps look into this matter of debt servicing and the fact that there are those who believe that if we do not incur more debt, there's not much we should expect from the performance of the 2024 budget.
Well, it's true. There's no country in the world that doesn't really borrow. I mean, I just reading yesterday, this morning, Israel making a case to the United States, for some amount of money to be loaned out, of course, because of what is happening with, the Israeli-Hamas war. And truly, every country borrows to some degree, but then when you're now heavily dependent on borrowing, that's where the problem is. Nobody is saying you shouldn't borrow to intervene in some plans that you have, but then you can't base your spending, alone on debt. It then means that it brings to bear the fragility of your fiscal policy. What if the borrowers don't then the lenders don't borrow you money? What happens? It then means that you won't be able to do anything internally. So those are issues, and that's why for sustainability purpose, it's important to look inwards and see, okay, how much can I raise? But then how do you raise money from poor people? Those are issues, and then you can't, you really need to, look at the welfare of your people, see how to upscale production internally and, scale up, their disposable income to be able to tax it. So those are issues the government will need to look at, and then hoping that the president has a plan to really improve revenue inflows to government.
Well, it is one thing to prepare a budget, it's another thing to also present it to the National Assembly and to also include the National Assembly in the preparation of budget. Because looking at the politicization of things, Nigeria's budget process has usually or always been politicized, where you have because of the rancor that had existed between the executive and the lawmaker, and they delay it. At a point in time, it's also been padded, and then you find the presidential assent, by mid of the fiscal year in the focus that have frequent occurrences in the country. And then we also Nigeria's budget does not really have the budget calendar, talking about the timing and the process of execution, presentation and execution and implementation. So how do you think this administration can avoid the politicization or the politicking that comes with the budget process?
You can't avoid the politicking. The people at the center of the budget preparation, budget scrutiny, and all of that, they are politicians. Politicians play politics. I mean, that's what they do. And they seize the moment to negotiate certain things for their constituencies, for their regions, and all of that. You can't isolate all of that in the process. But in that, if we're going to, yes, that will be involved, but it must be done responsibly. It must be done in a way that doesn't hurt the economy. It must be done in a way that is just, equitable, and fair to all. And it must be done in a way that puts, the masses, the majority of the people at the forefront. Let me also, say that there are two major kinds of auditing, that goes on in the public sector. There is the ex-ante scrutiny part of auditing, and then there is the ex-post, scrutiny part of auditing. The ex-ante scrutiny part of auditing is what happens before the budget is signed into law. The legislature has to look at it figure by figure, line by line, and see where the monies are going. And they have the authority of the people, because they represent the people, to do some scrutiny in that regard and make some adjustments propose certain adjustment to the executive and say, this is what we believe, the people want, this is what we believe. And if there are things that they feel aren't right in the preparation process of the budget, they call the attention of the executive to then amend it. The ex post, part of scrutiny, part of auditing is when the budget has been implemented, the Auditor General has audited it and then submits the report to the National Assembly, for that also, exercise. So it's important to allow the legislature to do its work, the ex ante scrutiny part of auditing, do it thoroughly, examine the budget that is being proposed, ensure that it is just, is fair, is equitable, and it puts the people at the center of it. And but like I said, in doing all of that, it must be done responsibly. And I expect that the current assembly will show up, some level of responsibility in doing. I mean, we don't want to see what we used to see.
Interesting. Let's look at perhaps revenue generation this time around. You mentioned earlier that the government is looking in the direction of mining. Perhaps you might want to expatiate on that and how that can quickly help us get some buffer with regards to the challenges we're already witnessing, the negativities with regards to our fiscal policies as it is, the CBN liquidity crisis. Will we be able to address all of these issues if we are looking in that direction?
Oh, I mean, very important, very important. I know that Mr. Adelake is proposing certain reforms in the mining sector, and we're really hoping that he's able to get it going. I mean, there is, the mineral deposits in several parts of the country. I understand that we have, lithium in Nasarawa State and in many other parts of the country. But then again, the issue in the mining sector and where revenue has really been hindered from that sector is the fact that that sector is largely dominated by artisanal miners. I mean, they constitute about 70% of the players. While we need to focus on the big players, the industries that are mining, those that have been licensed and all of that, and ensure that they do it in, ethically, we need to also look at those artisanal miners. Because truly, if you have a sector that is largely, dominated by undocumented players, then, to call revenue from such, operators will be difficult. I know that the mining ministry have, set up cooperatives to be able to organize these miners in such a way that it will be easy to, to place some level of oversight and tax them, fairly. Again, is that you have to also consider, their production and the operational techniques and all of that, and how, the government can help them to operate more efficiently and effectively. Because, like I said, you can't tax poor people. So if the miners are able to operate with increased efficiency and effectiveness, it means that they will be able to, put something back to government in terms of revenue. But more importantly, is that the big players need to, to regulate them more and ensure that whatever is mined from these mining sites is processed locally. I mean, that's how we're going to get jobs going. That's how we're going to get revenues in. And that's how we're going to ensure that whatever byproducts is even taken from some of these minerals we're able to use it locally to enhance our own economy. So I expect that, the mining ministry will be able to, get its strategic plan going and, ensure that we have increased revenue from that system. Again, one thing to also note is that the markets for minerals are not largely decentralized in Nigeria. As such, you have lots of middle players in that process. And most of the artisanal miners then lose revenue in that process. And when you lose money to middlemen, it's difficult to track it and tax it. So those are the issues that government will need to look at, ensure that maybe, to a large degree, decentralized markets where minerals can be traded, and then, organize the players, especially the artisanal miners, and track their operations so you can tax them properly and fairly.
Fantastic stuff. Looking at the 2024 budget, that the president is proposing, according to StatiSense, it says every 63 in 100 persons in Nigeria is multidimensionally poor. And we have to also look at how this budget impacts the lives of ordinary Nigerians. So the budget implementation phase has its own set of challenges, especially in the implementation, aspects of it. Because now the most obvious is been that the citizens lack access to the required project implementation data to provide oversight. Although the president's manifesto the president has a public manifesto, in what way can transparency be ensured so that citizens would be able to, follow the implementation of this budget ink by ink?
Well, you see, this is another big issue that you just mentioned. I'm really hoping that Ms. Hadiza Bala Usman is able to get going with our plans in terms of policy coordination and ensuring that the performance bond that the ministers or their ministries sign with the president in the next couple of weeks, they're able to get them going and ensure that they stick to the plans. You see, the issue about policy, now the politicians set out the policy direction in their manifesto. Oh, this is what I want to achieve in education, in health, in infrastructure, in whatever. But coming out of that policy are programs and projects of government. And those programs and projects are then tied into the fiscal policy document, like the budget like we're discussing this morning. The numbers, the monies, the revenue that needs to go into those projects and all that. How much of those revenues come in? And when they come in, how quickly do the ministry access it? And when they access it, what is, how efficiently do they put these monies to use to implement the projects and the programs, and by extension, realizing the objectives of the policy of the politician? I think these are real issues, and if we really need to, get us going in terms of the numbers that you just put out, the number of Nigerians that are multidimensionally poor, they won't just, get out of poverty like that. It has to be strategic, it has to be systemic, it has to be institutional, and we really have to get every bit of the aspect of the implementation process going. I'll give you an example. For instance, how much of performance auditing is being done on government programs and projects annually? You can ask the Office of the Auditor General for the Federation. And without that performance audit carried out and conducted on government programs and projects, and even implementation of policies, you won't be able to assess to what degree these programs are being, achieved, these projects are being implemented, what are the deficiencies, what are the areas that government needs to correct. And then another issue, for instance, let me tell you, as of today, we don't have the report of the Auditor General for 2020. The best practice in the world requires that reports of the Auditor General be put out in public domain 18 months after the end of the fiscal year. The 2019 report of the Auditor General took 23 months before it came out. Now, that of 2020 has taken more than 34 months already, and it's not out yet. And we're not even talking about the 2021 or the 2022 reports of the Auditor General. If you don't see these documents, you cannot even assess to what degree, efficiency, effectiveness, or economy, was realized in terms of implementing the budget, of government. So these are all interlinked issues. We really need to deal with it. And I expect that part of the fiscal policy recommendations that the committee in which Mr. Taiwo Edele heads will be able to propose to Mr. President will cover, some of these reforms that needs to be undertaken.
That's right.
Well, from what Hadiza Bala said to us yesterday, it's obviously no longer business as usual, since there will be a bond signed, and there will be also key performance indicators and key performance actions that will be reviewed, I think, on a quarterly basis or so, as she mentioned yesterday. So I believe maybe we should have some level of hope that this time around we'll see some key actions, although the challenge with us in this part of the world has been the matter of data management. We do not have data.
No, that is the issue. That is the issue. I'll tell you, we sent a freedom of information request to some ministries, departments, and agencies. I won't mention their names. It's been more than a month, even though the Freedom of Information Act is clear on the length of time to be taken to provide those kinds of information. But up until now, those data have not been released. Those are the issues. Now, with what Ms. Adiza said, we're hopeful. I'm hopeful. I'm an optimistic person. I'm not. I'm really looking forward to what she's able to get going. But then information, has to be out with regards to what is being done.
All right. So let's have your final words on this issue. What concerns you have, or what you project in terms of if certain steps are not taken, what do you see?
Well, like I said, some of those fiscal policy reforms that needs to be taken, that needs to be implemented, has to be implemented very quickly if we must, get going in terms of, the implementation and the performance of the budget, and not performance in terms of releases of funds. I mean performance on the ground. What are we seeing? Is it commensurate to what we're putting out in terms of money expenditure? Again, in terms of revenue, the tax policy reforms that needs to be carried out. I know these things are going to be done in phases, and I expect again the tax policy, the fiscal policy and tax reform committee will be able to get some recommendations quickly to Mr. President so that we can open up the space for revenue and then responsible budget implementation. But finally, is that, for instance, the government is looking at GDP projection of 3.7 or thereabout. I don't see that. I don't see the feasibility there. In 2021, we had 3.6%. It dropped down to 3.3% in 2022. As at Q1 2023, we were at 2.3% GDP. If we must then achieve 3.7, like the budget minister is saying, we need to really be intentional, be bold about our reforms and practices, and ensure that we get them going.
In fact, IMF in a recent report said that South Africa is perhaps going to take over Nigeria's position as the biggest economy in Africa. What say you to that?
We hope that doesn't happen anyway.
You said what?
We hope that doesn't happen.
Right, but you have said it all, that we need to be intentional with regards to achieving the desired result if we want to maintain certain positions and see the desired result at the end of the day. All right, we must thank you, Public Finance and Policy Analyst Olusegun Elemo, for your time on the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.